welcome to another episode of Foreign Correspondents. I'm Somi Sorang, and joining me is our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the program. Now, there's no question that one of the most frequently talked about issues in the Korean media this past week was the Me Too movement. So going around the table, what was the most interesting topic or most interesting story that you've read this past week?
I'm frankly surprised that it happened at all because Me Too has been very prominent in the United States, but Korea, as somebody who's lived here for the past 3 years, is so gendered, and the attitude toward feminism and just women speaking out and using their voices has often been received quite negatively, and sometimes with violence. For this to happen and for women to be able to emerge and come out of the shadows here and speak out, I think that's excellent.
Okay, and Koichi?
Yeah, actually, I was very surprised of the this explosiveness in the Korean society. It started with the prosecutor saw in late January, right? And compared to Japan, in Japanese society, the Me Too started, I think, last May. From the Japanese journalist called Ito Shiori. And it was a very shocking story, and it was covered by all the magazines and newspapers and TV. But it looks like the movement is much slower in Japan compared to what's going on in Korea, so it was surprising.
Okay, Frank?
Yeah, just to echo Elisa's remarks, I think it's about time that gender relations in South Korea are addressed a little bit more publicly. What I found quite interesting was that Go-eun was outed as somebody who was accused of sexual harassment, and he's somebody that we talked about on this program as being a candidate for the Nobel Prize. Yeah. And I think now that's probably in jeopardy, certainly.
Definitely. So from the arts and entertainment industries all the way to the medical and legal professions, the Me Too movement here in Korea has gained significant traction in recent months. So this week on Foreign Correspondents, the topic is Me Too movement in Korea. Recently, the Me Too movement has been making huge waves in South Korean society. A female South Korean prosecutor blew the whistle on her experiences on an online forum, subsequently appearing on television 3 days later.
저는 모든 것을 사실대로 진술하였습니다. 이 사건을 계기로 과거의 피해자들이 안심하고 자유롭게 앞으로 나오고 미래의 가해자들이 없어지기를 바랍니다.
The Me Too movement, which was mostly an online campaign up until that point, began spreading to the offline domain as well following this incident. The rise of the Me Too movement has been especially prominent in South Korea's arts and entertainment industries. On February 6th, a renowned South Korean poet was accused of sexual harassment by a fellow colleague. And just days later, on February 14th, it was revealed that a famous stage director had repeatedly harassed a number of actresses.
일부 단원들은 끊임없이 제게 항의하고 문제 제기하고 했습니다만 제가 제 자신을 다스리지 못했어요.
The South Korean society was thrown into a state of shock after a number of well-known actors, cartoonists, and photographers were named as perpetrators of sexual assault. Sexual harassment is not an issue that's confined solely to the country's art scene. The Me Too movement began spreading all across society amid various revelations of sexual misconducts by a Catholic priest, a university professor, and a medical doctor. Following the stream of testimony by a number of sexual harassment victims, the police began investigating the reports in earnest. The presidential office of 청와대 has given its full backing of the Me Too movement.
문화와 의식이 바뀌어야 하는 문제인 만큼 범사회적인 미투 운동의 확산과 각 분야별 자정 운동이 필요하다고 생각합니다.
The Me Too movement is heating up in South Korea, In this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of journalists to discuss the phenomenon in more depth. Now, in terms of how the Me Too movement is unfolding here in Korea, do you think there's a distinct Korean flavor to it as opposed to how it's unfolding, for example, in the States or Europe?
I think something that we sort of got at is the speed. So the sort of rapid fire expansion of this is Korean, right? Because in that trends take over really quickly here. And the slow burn that Koichi refers to of happening in Japan, I think is cultural. And the quick sort of spread here in South Korea, I also think could be attributed to culture.
Right. Now, aside from the cultural aspect, do you think the explosive nature of it can be attributed to the fact that gender inequality is a much more grave issue in Korea compared to the rest of the world?
I think gender inequality is quite grave all over the world. And while it is more severe in Korea, it's more severe in certain areas, like appearance. You know, I think appearance matters a lot more in Korea than it would in the States. And then representation, it's really quite bad when it comes to leadership in business and in politics. But in some ways, it's just degrees. So it's sadly unequal everywhere.
Sadly can be found all over the world. Now, in terms of how the Me Too movement unfolded, it began with a prosecutor here in Korea, but its continuation has been most notable, I think, in the entertainment industry. And in the US as well, the Me Too movement over there, it started in the film industry. Do you think this is a coincidence?
No, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it might have something to do with the subjectivity involved in evaluating talent and how that can be exploited by agents and directors and producers.
I saw you agreeing there.
Yeah, same. I mean, the thing about the entertainment industry is you're constantly being judged anyway, right? And so the person in position of power is often the casting director, the producer, and these people are often men. Women are often the people auditioning. It sets up this imbalance in the system in and of itself, right? It's inherent to acting and theater and film.
And in those industries, you're not under contract. You don't have a long-term employment contract. It's a one television show or one movie deal, and then once you're done that, you have to be recast and rehired again. And so again, there's this exploitative sort of relationship between the people in power and the talent.
Right, so I guess the frequency at which you are being exposed, you are put in that sort of situation is much more higher for the entertainment industry. Yeah, unfortunately. Now let's talk about the repercussions for the perpetrators. Some of the perpetrators, they have admitted to their wrongdoings and have given apologies either through their publicist, press conference, or on social media. But the public opinion is that it's not enough. The apology wasn't sincere, it wasn't respectful, which begs the question, how can the perpetrators apologize so that their apology is both respectful and genuine?
I'm all about the courts. So, you know, an apology is one thing, but prosecuting that person's behavior through the courts, I would look more for some type of recompense that way.
Yeah, because in some cases of these accusations, it's sexual assault, it's rape, right? I mean, these would be charges that the police should bring if it indeed is rape. And if it's criminal, it's criminal. Some sexual harassment cases are really more power dynamic related, right? Like, I got fired or I didn't get this job because I didn't go home and have drinks with my boss or whatever. So in those cases, it's not criminal. I wouldn't bring charges for that, but then this person, whoever it is, might suffer some sort of career consequence or have to give a more public apology to everyone in the workforce or, you know, lose a promotion. So these things do end up getting adjudicated in degrees, but if it's criminal, right? I mean, the law should apply to everyone.
Right. So you talked about crime, the courts. So in the court of public opinion, though, we have to ask, some of the artists that have been accused of crimes and those people who have actually admitted to their wrongdoings, do you think they can continue working the way they have, or is it time for retirement?
It depends. I mean, it depends whether people will buy tickets to their movies, people will continue to see their shows. A lot of this gets determined by the market. I mean, nobody will finance a Harvey Weinstein movie, example, in the U.S. He's persona non grata. He's been thrown out of all of the guilds, right? The Producers Guild, the Directors Guild. He can't, he's basically cannot go out in public in Hollywood anymore. So his job is gone, not necessarily because he has criminal charges or had criminal charges. It's gone because he's been so shamed by the public that won't pay to see his product anymore.
Right. Now, some of these artists and writers that have been implicated here, they were held in such high regard that their works could be found in public school textbooks even. And some are calling for its removal. So do you think these perpetrators' talents, their merits, should be reevaluated in light of their crimes, or should the two things be considered separately?
It's really tough question, and my feeling goes back and forth about that. First, I also thought that it should be removed, but thinking about all the history of human being and all the masterpiece, then of course, if we judge current standard, then they're one of the great artists or a novelist might have done something wrong. So it's really difficult.
Yeah, I'm with Koichi. I don't think we can use today's standards to judge the behavior of the past. For example, Thomas Jefferson, if we could remove him from the textbooks in the United States because he slept with his slave, or a number of his slaves. And so Bill Clinton, same problem. And so if we were to judge Bill Clinton and his behavior by today's standards, the history would judge him far more harshly, I think. And so it's impossible to go back in time and re-adjudicate all of this, but I think if you're still living and you're still working, you can certainly be held to the standards of today.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's talk about media coverage. In the present climate is such that even allegations of misconduct, not proven, they can irreversibly damage a person's reputation. So what sort of caution, what level of caution do you think the media should exercise in reporting claims of abuse?
It's just same as other incident. We have to double check in any cases. So of course, in Me Too incident, we have to double check.
Right.
In a lot of these cases, it's very, very, very hard to come forward, and people aren't coming forward until many years later because there's so much social pressure not to say anything. You see this in Japan, of course, again and again. And so usually, and what we've found, especially in the States, is if there is one case of this, there are other cases. So approach these stories with curiosity and with the same sort of vigor and rigor that you would apply to other investigative cases. There are probably more people. They are likely to be willing to speak out if they feel like they keep their identities protected, which is what the Washington Post did for the women who came forward against Roy Moore, the Senate candidate who was dating them when they were teenagers. So if you can protect their identities, if you do the work to verify, and gain the trust of the sources, there's some real good reporting opportunities here.
Do you think the alleged perpetrators need to be protected until proven?
It depends. I mean, in some of these cases, they are public figures, they're Senate candidates, right? And so they put themselves out there in order to be judged by the public anyway, right, for a vote. And oftentimes these people are in positions of power, so they certainly need to be asked and consulted, like, hey, 14 people have these accusations against you, what do you say to that? I thought there was one lazy case of journalism in the US in which somebody wrote a first-person account of her encounter with the comedian Aziz Ansari, and the publication didn't give Aziz Ansari much of a voice in responding to these allegations. So there's the same rules of fairness and verification should apply.
I think a real strong point that Elise made is that it's not just an isolated incident. There are always, several women that have been, harassed by the individuals that have been outed in the press. And when that first woman comes forward, finding other women to come forward is a responsibility of the press before they, out that person and publicize that name and move forward with an article. And generally, they've done that.
Okay. All right, so the Me Too movement has been unfolding, not just in Korea, but abroad as well. So let's take a look at how it's unfolding in different parts of the world. The Me Too movement was the brainchild of Hollywood actress Alyssa Milano, who first came up with the idea last October. According to a recent survey by USA Today, 9 out of 10 people working in the Hollywood entertainment industry said they had experienced sexual harassment or violence in one form or another at least once in their careers. The survey lends evidence that sexual harassment is far more prevalent in the industry, even beyond what was imagined following the testimony of numerous A-list Hollywood actresses. Given the number of hidden abuses and silent victims, the Me Too movement has remained highly active in Hollywood. At the Golden Globe Awards on January 7th, everyone in attendance, including actors, actresses, writers, and directors, appeared at the red carpet dressed head to toe in black. The black attire was a sign of their solidarity with the Me Too movement. And at the Grammy Awards on January 28th, the participants either held a white rose in their hands or had it pinned to their chest, also as a sign of resistance against sexual violence. Support for the Me Too movement was also on display at the 2018 British Academy Film Awards, which was held on February 18th. Many actresses such as Angelina Jolie and Jennifer Lawrence attended the award ceremony dressed in black.
Well, the next step is to keep the conversation going, to keep the conversation firing, and to turn words into actions. We need equality now, that's enough.
Over in China, the Me Too movement has also gotten underway via social media, despite strict censorship and control by the central government. China's Me Too activists have used the hashtag, quote, #WoYeXi, a Chinese translation of the Me Too phrase, to further raise awareness on the issue of sexual harassment in China. The Me Too movement is spreading rapidly all across the globe. All eyes are focused on the aftermath of the campaign and how long it can sustain itself. So what do you think about the notion that sexual harassment stems from an imbalance of power?
There is a good reason for this power imbalance makes that sexual harassment. And lately I saw a Japanese article that there are college students, female students who are in the job hunting period easily get the victim of sexual harassment, and that's because of the power gap from hiring person. And
We definitely need more women in charge of things.
Yeah.
I mean, this is across the board, especially in Korea, where the representation of women at the tops of boards and the tops of government is shockingly, jaw-droppingly low. And so I think that could certainly help. But I also think that this moment that we're seeing in which women are finding their voice and speaking out, so long as there's consequences and the people who come forward see that their accusers are facing some sort of consequences, be it criminal if it's that end of it, or just reputational, then that's going to spark more people to come forward. Because one of the reasons why I haven't chosen to come forward or other women haven't chosen to come forward in our lives is because what's the point?
Yeah.
You just approach it with a certain passivity.
Yeah, and you suffer the consequences, not the perpetrator.
Right.
Now, sexual harassment is certainly not a new thing. So why do you think people, women, men as well, are suddenly coming forward en masse at this particular point in time?
It might be something of a sudden thing, but I think that this is a trend that has been happening in, around the world for decades. And maybe there was, ebbs and flows in that have taken place. For example, we'll look back to the 60s and say, okay, that was a time when women's rights really kind of increased relative to men. And maybe this is another time when we'll see a boom in that. But I think it's an ongoing trend and something that needs to be carried on, pretty much forever. I mean, when you look at the imbalance that I mentioned with executives and that Elise pointed to as well.
Right. Now, some of the perpetrators, they have been saying that they didn't realize their words and actions would constitute sexual harassment. Now, well, some are obviously lying, they did it knowingly, but there are some that genuinely didn't know that their comments would constitute sexual harassment. Where did we go wrong as a society? Is there a lack of education? Is there a lack of discussion on what is and what isn't sexual harassment?
I think that you're right, though, that this is an uncomfortable time and people are having uncomfortable conversations. And this has to do with your question in that what you internalize growing up as the way to be a man and the way to be a woman and the way to act in society is often from various influences, including your parents and your school. And we do need to have more uncomfortable conversations and have conversations with our kids about how to be a man and examine the messages that we send or give in pop culture. For example, and again in K-dramas, right? The woman has to be the one who's pursued, and the man has to be the one who's the pursuer. Why is this the case? And in this case, you're essentially setting up a system in which the man might have to grab a woman's arm, which could be seen as an act of violence in some cases.
But it's interpreted as an act of romance.
Right, exactly. And so who's making these films?
Yeah.
Why is this the way that we consider the pursuit of women, or why do we consider this romantic? And so why doesn't the women's desire, and why can't women take agency of their own? And so all these conversations that are very thorny and uncomfortable sometimes, I think we should be having, and we should even be having them with elementary school kids, so that they better can advocate for themselves and what they feel is equitable.
Yeah, I'm really, worried sometimes. I have a daughter, and she's going to an Egypt, a kindergarten here, and her genderification is taking place a little bit, too extraordinary for me to really, and perhaps a little bit too early for me to really feel that good about. I want to kind of be in control, and I want her to understand that she can be anything that she wants to be. And she's already channeled into this, pink is her favorite color, and certain jobs are, and certain roles that she plays in her relations with her playmates, male or female, are gendered in a way that sometimes I'm not all that comfortable with.
All right. Now, going forward, what are some policy measures that the government can take in terms of preventing further crimes?
Last year in Japan, we finally revised criminal law for the sexual assaults in 110 years.
Wow.
So it was an advancement, but still experts are saying there are much more room to revise. So
how did it get revised?
it broadened the definition of sexual assault.
Okay.
It was very narrow 110 years ago, of course. So I think that kind of law making and revising is one of the part of the measure we have to take.
What about you, Frank?
Well, again, my main sort of point here is that it's the larger issue that needs to be addressed. For instance, one headline this week mentioned that less than 400,000 births took place, I think, in the past year in South Korea. So if we're going to address power-gender relations, we need to address issues like childcare and parental leave, which I think like 3 months or a year or whatever it is, parental leave is kind of absurd. So as a society, those other broader issues need to be addressed if we're going to fix the gender power gap and resolve issues like sexual harassment.
Right. So finally, how much longer do you think the Me Too movement will last?
I think this could be, as I mentioned, sort of part of a boom in terms of the public's attention to this issue. But I hope and I expect that this issue is something that's going to carry on and needs to be addressed in a much more comprehensive manner than just the issue of a few perpetrators of sexual harassment.
Right. Koichi?
Yeah, well, actually, as long as the sexual harassment stays, then this movement should go on. And also, as Elise said, we need to have a more difficult discussion in the society, and it gives us a chance to have such discussion. And actually, I'm learning quite a lot since this movement started.
All right. Any final comments?
I was pleased to see that President Moon Jae-in put out a statement supporting the Me Too movement that's going on in Korea, and I do hope that women have channels to speak up. One tactical thing that could be done is just workplaces should formalize their process for how to report, because one of the things that we've seen at my company, which has also been roiled by sexual harassment complaints, is that you don't know who to go to, and that person then doesn't know who to go to, and you don't know that your complaint will actually see a response or be followed up on. So
right, it often gets lost in the system.
Exactly. So just to have workplaces basically say, this is how you report, and we will take your report seriously and follow up on it and investigate, I think that could really help women in workplaces.
Some standard operating procedures. All right. Victims of sexual violence are finally breaking their silence and speaking out, and I'm sure that their bravery will not go in vain but lead to positive changes for the future. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.